everybody, my name is Eugenia and today I will be discussing Jim Jones, who was most known for Jonestown, the huge massacre that occurred in South America in the 70s. And I will be doing my makeup at the same time, so I hope you enjoy the video. Alright, so first off, I'm going to go ahead and put my hair to the side. I have my mirror down here, so I will be looking down there quite often. Okay. Alright, so let's go ahead and get started. So, Jim Jones was born May 13th in 1931 in Crete, Indiana. But Jim really enjoyed going to church growing up, and he decided to become a minister after he graduated from Butler University. He was very charismatic, which led to him becoming a very persuasive persuasive speaker, and he gained a lot of followers with a very diverse demographic of people, because he was very a big proponent of racial equality and integration. So people actually also thought he was a psychic and that he had healing powers. He was very caring towards the homeless and became director of the Human Rights Commission in Indianapolis. Jim was scared of nuclear warfare, and he moved the church to Northern California in 1965, and this was the People's Temple. Moved to Ukiah, California, and then to San Francisco in 1971. So by that time, Jones was known as the Prophet, but had many allegations of misconduct with his followers, about income and sexual harassment, assault accusations. But before Jonestown, the People's Temple and his ministry, Jim Jones was James Warren Jones. His mother was Lunette Putnam, and she saw her son as a divine celestial being that could be a Messiah. And obviously with an upbringing like that, of course your head is gonna get filled with some big ideas. So kids that attended school with Jim and were friends with him claimed many times that he found entertainment in unusual ways, like burning little deceased animals, which is actually a very common sign for serial killers. So a quote from Lunette, or Jim's mother, is, "From the time he was 5 years old, I thought Jimmy was a really weird kid. There was something not quite right. He was obsessed with religion. He was obsessed with death," end quote. So Lunette, who eventually changed her name to Lynetta, was wedded to a World War I veteran, James Thurman Jones. After World War I, James returned physically disabled and in a wheelchair, and was known to be an alcoholic amongst, everyone in the neighborhood. Jim and James never had a close relationship. They were never a normal father-son type relationship, as James was not a fatherly figure. So he was spending most of his days at like a bar or the pool hall. And Jim created the fatherly figure he never had through the People's Temple. Many of his followers would address him as Dad. Little weird, but one follower, Stanley Clayton, was scrutinized for having intercourse with multiple women. And during a white night, which was a kind of like gathering in sacred time in the People's Temple. He was shamed for his past affairs and dealing drugs, but he nevertheless was a very devoted follower and even called Jim Jones dad. So this is a conversation between Jim and Stanley. So, open quote, Jones. Ran the streets, man, ran the streets. What did you do? Whose market did you get in? Did you get on somebody's block and sell some dope? Stanley. I did a little of that, Dad. You can see that he was kind of shaming people, even though he preached that everyone is equal and that we shouldn't be, tormented for our past and previous life choices. Jones led one of the largest cults, one of the largest cult followings in the United States that we have seen, and disguised it as religion. Religion is meant to console someone's soul, and it's a place where you're supposed to feel safe and you're supposed to feel support. But unfortunately, there are some individuals who take advantage of that, such as Jim Jones, and they're humans that look for solidarity through religion because they don't have a lot of support in their personal lives. Jim Jones became a famous reverend for leading approximately 900 of his followers to their deaths. The People's Temple of the Disciples of Christ, the movement Jim Jones began, started in 1955 and from Indianapolis, Indiana, bringing his followers to San Francisco, California, and guided them to Jonestown, Guyana. Jonestown, Guyana was an isolated jungle property that Jim purchased, and there was a remote area with no one to govern his ways of controlling his worshipers and leading them down the path of righteousness. Jones' strength of character appealed to countless people with miscellaneous backgrounds, and obviously this caused an obsession with power and turned a loving and embracing place of solidarity into front headlines of a cult and a mass suicide massacre. So November 18th, 1978 was a devastating day as many inhumane acts were escalating and led to the largest mass suicide massacre known in human history. That warm summer-like day rose with much tension. So the Congressman Leo Ryan was going to meet with the People's Temple community uninvited. Jones did not want him there for obvious reasons, because he would disrupt the control that he had over his people. And a lot of people at that time actually did want to leave, but had no way out because they were in the middle of the jungle. Many followers heard that others were departing from Jonestown. When the congressman rounded the residents that wanted to leave, there was a follower that came behind him and with his intention to kill, and he stabbed him. He wasn't severely hurt, but he recognized that he was in danger, as well as the crew that he brought with him. Before Congressman Leo Ryan took off, there were men that had opened fire on the aircraft and the followers of Jonestown to keep them there. So the congressman had fallen at this point, and a few of his crew members were wounded. But they did their best to escape with their lives and return with, greater authorities, more power. And after the congressman was deceased, he passed away. Jim Jones conducted one of his usual speeches in the pavilion of Jonestown. There was this main square area that he conducted lectures and speeches. He alerted the people by calling into the microphone "White Knight." So this was often a drill that meant the People's Temple were under attack, and the loyal believers were expected to fight for their promised land, even if it meant death. The calling was occasionally used when the People's Temple was in California, but the members truly became acquainted with the term in Jonestown. The White Knight on November 18th, 1978 would be the final one that the People's Temple would see. During the drills, Jim Jones would pass Flavor Aid. They commonly mistaked it for Kool-Aid. I mean, there's debate. People are not 100% sure whether it was Kool-Aid, but my sources and the research that I did said that it was Flavor Aid, which was a knockoff of Kool-Aid. And that's where the famous drink the Kool-Aid phrase came from. He called everyone and they would be obligated to drink it. He would spasmodically declare that there was poison in the drink and cause an uproar on other occasions of these White Knights. But this White Knight, the Flavor Aid, was actually spiked with potassium cyanide, Valium, and other drugs that became harmful in large doses. The members were instructed to give the Flavor Aid to children first, and then to drink it themselves and lie on the floor. A sufficient amount of people were not willing to drink this, and it would be forced down their throats. Many were on the floor in convulsions, others were holding their loved ones, and 87 followers escaped this calling of death by running into the jungle, or falling asleep, or simply not being in Jonestown at that time. There are many reasons as to why something like Jonestown happens. Most people seek love and support and fall down a dark spiral. The members of People's Temple were seeking refuge, and instead of finding refuge, they joined a cult unknowingly. Jim Jones preached to people that were neglected by society, or they felt neglected by society at the time. And he allowed a diverse group of people to come together in solidarity. He preached that capitalism, racism, and fascism were the greatest sins that could be committed. And this appealed to many believers, obviously. And a quote from Jim Jones: "If you're born in capitalist America, racist America, fascist America, then you're born in sin. But if you're born in socialism, you're not born in sin," end quote. In the United States, Black people were fighting to gain their civil rights. It wasn't until President Lyndon B. Johnson that signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that Black people were considered equal. But this act did not change the way society actually acted towards Black people. The People's Temple was an accepting community that invited people from all ethnicities, backgrounds, and races. So the People's Temple were known at the time for integration and incorporation. The members felt a part of something substantial while being at the People's Temple and asked their families and friends to join. And many actually did. So during this era of McCarthyism, many feared to express their communist beliefs. But Jim Jones was a firm supporter. He would often preach of living in a utopian society and where communism would reign, as all members of the People's Temple would live equally. So obviously his charismatic public speaking captured the attention of many, and his passion mesmerized people to join the church. He had teachings of communism and socialism and just nothing that the United States stood for at the time. But obviously, with the more power that he gained, the more he would abuse that power. Jim Jones would accumulate a devoted following and shame them if they disobeyed. The members would entrust him with their biggest fears and secrets and mistakes, and he would use it against them. He would even do it during communal assemblies, so completely embarrass them in front of the whole community. And members would report other individuals to Jones if they had defied him and would be rewarded doing so. And it created an environment of fear and mistrust between families and friends. A quote from Melissa Dittman: Jones instructed followers to give him written statements about their fears and mistakes, and then if they disobeyed him, he used that information to humiliate them or subject them to their worst fears during public meetings, end quote. Fear was also created in the community by masking it as safety from the outside world. The People's Temple began as Community Unity in Indianapolis, Indiana, and gained many followers because Jim Jones conducted healing services and helped the church community. The healing services were obviously a complete hoax. And it was to recruit believers to community unity. He urged the people to bring their families and to come to services and see these miracles happen. The following was becoming greater because of this, which called for a bigger space. Jim purchased a $50,000 property with the word temple engraved on it, or carved on it. Apart from being briefly known as the Wings of Deliverance, they were called the People's Temple. So the church was officially named the People's Temple. And a quote from Jeff Gwynn: People's Temple, not people's, because the apostrophe symbolized ownership. After all, one of the key temple goals was to discourage obsession with material possessions, end quote. So this racially diverse church was too much for Indianapolis. So Jim Jones and his 700 followers, the People's Temple, moved to San Francisco, California in July of 1965. California brought more followers with it, and being much more of a liberal population. And Jim had an extensive plan for the People's Temple as he signed papers to purchase land in Guyana around the summer of 1974. The line of being a cult or a church became blurred for the People's Temple after the move to South America. There was much to be done in the area where Jonestown would erect. It was an isolated wilderness that would eventually house approximately 1,000 lives. The worshippers were promised a paradise in Guyana. So many followed him again. As they got acquainted to the lifestyle in Jonestown, equality was non-existent. Plenty of worshippers worked on enervating amount of time for their basic needs. Another quote from Melissa Dittman: Jones blurred the relationship between words and reality, for example, by requiring his followers to give him daily thanks for good food and work, yet the people were starving and working 6.5 days a week. He also established himself as a leader of the believers subconsciously. First off, he named Jonestown after his last name, which shows a sense of narcissism. He also strategically placed his chair in the pavilion, the main area of the gatherings, on a higher post than the benches of the people. This evokes a sense of authority, as it is like a throne of a king. Jim also placed loudspeakers all around Jonestown to ensure that the worshippers would always be able to listen to him. He often used scare tactics by telling the people that there's chaos outside of Jonestown, and that he can protect them. Another quote from Jim Jones during one of his lectures in the White Nights: "I wouldn't be surprised there's not a fascist coup in the making in the United States of America. Certainly there's a reactionary hold in elements of government. These fuckers wouldn't stand under our door." The impact that Jim Jones left was immense. Apart from being the biggest cult responsible for the largest mass suicide massacre in history, he brought integration and solidarity to people that were outcasts of society. The followers trusted Jim, and they thought that he would have their best interests in mind, but found deceit was an easier path. Jones knew that his members would uncover their deepest fears and regrets if he would isolate them from their loved ones and then eventually use their fears against them. He would leave them powerless and to be dependent on him and not abandon him. Service and other ceremonies were kept lively and excitable to lure the members back into the promised land. Jim continued to preach celibacy even to married couples to sabotage their relationship, and insisted that men and women are all homosexual and he was the only true heterosexual being. Jim would engage in intercourse with many members of the People's Temple and would claim that he was doing them a favor, not wanting to take part in that. He accused the followers that he raped of wanting to engage in intercourse when none of them did. But the people had set Jones in a higher spot than they had God. Another quote from Melissa Dittman: "What you need to believe in is what you can see. If you can see me as your friend, I'll be your friend. If you can see me as your father, I'll be your father. For those of you that don't have a father, if you see me as your savior, I'll be your savior. If you see me as your God, I'll be your God." End quote. His followers were obviously not going to go against his will, and you would do anything that he asked. The fatal day of November 18th, 1978 had brought the people to their final decision. But Jones was the one that made that decision. There were followers that were violently held down and forced to drink the Flavor Aid, but he had broken his worshippers' egos down so much that contemplating suicide was normal for them. With all the strategical brainwashing techniques that he would use to dominate their mind, he was successful in bringing more than 900 people to their deaths, including himself and his families. Jim Jones had come to an end with a gunshot to the head, and so did Jonestown. On November 19th, 1978, troops of the United States military were sent down to help bring back the citizens for proper burials. Bodies were scattered from the main site of Jonestown all the way into the jungle. This is one of the most horrendous atrocities that has ever occurred, and the fact that Jim Jones brainwashed and brought these people to their demise makes him an ultimately horrible, disgusting human being. This place where the most support is found, religion, is one of the most vulnerable states of mind, as it uncovers the core of what one believes in and stands for, and that can unfortunately be manipulated easily. And that is the end of the case of Jonestown. Even though it's a horrible tragedy that occurred, I hope you guys enjoyed learning more about this horrible, terrible event. But it really truly shook so many people in the 70s and early 80s because nothing like that had ever happened before. But yes, I hope you enjoyed the video regardless. This is the makeup look that I came up with. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please don't join a cult, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye!